Hey Beauty, on this show I have a friend of mine, Autumn Brueckmann. I'm going to read a little bit about her in the About the Author section on Amazon. This is what she says. Of all the things you could know about me, I would like the first to be that I love my family dearly. My husband and I have been married for 10 years and we have been parents for 6 years. We are foster and adoptive parents currently raising five beautiful children. I have spent my time writing because I believe words can change the world. Time and again, a culturally relevant story published at the right time has redirected the hearts of man and altered the course of history. It is my desire to open the eyes of Americans to the values of truth and freedom once again. We're changing it up a little bit on this show. For this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about politics. I know that this is a very touchy subject. We talk about engaging in politics in a loving manner with friends and family, school systems, and in the church. We talk about how speaking about politics can unfortunately cause division and hurt. We talk about the huge problem of censorship. We talk about what the church's role should be when it comes to politics. As I've already said, this is a sensitive topic, but I feel like it's super important and of course very relevant for the time that we are in right now. So I really encourage you to tune in to the rest of this episode because it really is relevant for everyone. Before we get into the show, I want to remind you of my free gift, my free guide, Holistically Healthy Woman 4 Steps to Move Away from Modern Medicine for Christians. To grab your free gift, go to herholistichealing.com/free. With all that being said, let's go talk with Autumn. Welcome to Her Holistic Healing. Do you want to move away from modern medicine and learn healthier alternatives for your family? Do you want a healthy body? Do you want to live the life that God intended you to live? Hey, I'm Alexandra. I love Jesus. I'm a wife, mom of three, author, and registered nurse with years of experience in clinical research. When I started experiencing chronic health issues, I was confused about all the different diets and conflicting opinions. I felt anxious because I couldn't solve the mystery of my health until God showed me that He is the source of true healing. In this podcast, you will learn Bible truths and holistic treatments that will help you to stop relying on pharmaceuticals. You can experience true lasting healing that will allow you to make a greater eternal impact in your home and community. So what do you say we take a break from the mind-numbing humdrum busyness? Let's rest and let God be our healer and helper. Welcome back to the show. I have a very special guest today, Autumn Brueckmann. Autumn, you have an awesome podcast and you wrote this great book that I've been recommending to everyone. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and your podcast?
Yeah, so the book is 2034 Cautionary Tale. And, if you want to pick one up, it's on Amazon. So I wrote the book to take the themes from 1984 and put them in today's modern context. So if you're not familiar with 1984, its themes are big government, censorship, and that totalitarian feel, very dystopian, right? People don't have, the freedoms that we value so much here in America. And I just saw all these news articles and stories and conversations where people bring it up. They bring up Big Brother and totalitarianism, and they're always blaming the other side. And a lot of people just don't see how it's actually playing out here. So I wanted to connect that theme with our current political issues, the things that people are talking about and facing now, and just help people see like what's coming down the line if we don't start making some corrections and start paying attention to what's going on. And then the podcast stemmed out of that. So after publishing the book and just working on developing an audience, we wanted to have a space to have those kind of conversations where people can just talk about issues. Sometimes people hear the word politics and they just immediately shy away or get upset. And we need to be able to talk about things that are challenging and that are difficult. So we wanted to create a space where we can deal with some uncomfortable things and look at it from a conservative Christian perspective.
So, was there something big that happened in your life that prompted you to write the book, or
No, I
just
wouldn't say there's any big event. In all things, as a Christian, I try to walk in step with whatever God has for me. And I like to look at George Washington Carver. So he was an African American scientist after the time of slavery, and his whole mindset was to invite God into his laboratory with him, as if they were like lab partners working together. So I wanted to have that same mindset writing the book. I think no matter what you're doing, whether it's considered, religious or secular, you want God to be in it. You want to be with, God's plan. And so I give him credit for all the inspiration for it. But as far as, just the little things that happened in my life that led up to it, I was reading books by Eric Metaxas, and he writes these amazing stories of people's lives. Like I read a book about Bonhoeffer. The first book I ever read about him was about Martin Luther. And there's just so many stories about these people who just changed the world. And, they're just ordinary people, but they did incredible things. And so just realizing that ability of a person to make a big impact on culture. And I thought about the book Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And it's a fiction novel, and it was about events that were happening at the time, and it really just changed people's mindsets and helped them prioritize, the importance of abolition and ending slavery. And Abraham Lincoln's, said to have, attributed her as the one who started the war, just because of how influential that was. And so that was kind of the impact or the mindset behind writing a novel, was to use fiction, which is, a story that people can connect with and can relate to in a different way than people can connect with a nonfiction text, and use that as a tool to, help people to have conversations about things that are uncomfortable. And, whatever impact it has, big or small, just even being able to help one person to just sort of see what's going on and see the value of seeking the truth in whatever's going on, and the value of having those conversations with people.
yeah, when I think about Jesus in the Bible, he used many stories to reach people, and I think I love literature. I love reading stories. I read nonfiction too, but when I'm reading it, I always hope that it'll be shorter because nonfiction can be kind of boring. But I love fiction, and I think, yeah, I think if the listeners read the book, it'll definitely impact them in a big way. So in the book, you bring up a lot of health issues. Are there certain health issues that come to mind that you're concerned about, or that you want people to pay attention to, something that reminds you of what happened these past few years, or that you may be concerned that they'll happen in the future?
Yeah, I think a big issue right now is censorship in terms of medicine and just what people are allowed to say and not allowed to say. And so, in the novel, you see a lot of those same things from 1984 of propaganda and one message getting out. And then just that sort of fear-based reaction to that, of people just accepting what they're told, not questioning, sort of going along with it, whether or not they fully understand what's going on. Because if you start to question, or if you start to say the wrong things, then it's just this inevitable something bad will happen. And people don't always understand what the consequence will be. But we see that happening now already, obviously not on the scale of the book yet, but we see, physicians who are concerned about what they can say because they might lose their license. And, people, they're sending their kids to public school, and they're not looking into what's going on or what they're being taught. We have schools that are, intentionally withholding information from parents, trying to establish their own relationship with a student, almost in a way to supersede the relationship that they have with a parent as far as the influence they have over the child. So it's just so important for people to have information, to be able to speak the truth, to be able to share the reality of what's going on. And we do already see this kind of coercion and power play in terms of medicine and what's going on, with the connections between the government and big pharmacies, and the fear that some physicians have as far as what they're allowed to say or not say.
I feel like the issue of being courageous and saying something is a big issue. So what would you say to those people, those parents, or just anyone who sees things that they're concerned about, but they're scared? What would you say to them?
Well, I'd say that, courage begets courage. I think sometimes people feel like they're just one person, and so it's not going to make a big impact anyway, so they may as well just not overcome that fear. But you don't know the impact that you might have by stepping up, or someone else that might see that and might, you're not the only one that's having these concerns. You're not the only one that's having these issues. And so kind of seeing it from that bigger perspective. I think also realizing that there's many ways to respond. I think sometimes people think there's only two options, that there's either the option of not saying anything, or there's the option of being like a rude monster. And it's like, you don't have to, approach things rudely. Like, you can be civil and be polite and still engage with people and question people. But there is a point, you can't be afraid of the accusations. Like, people might accuse you of being rude or of being impolite or not caring about them or whatever, but you can't base your decisions based on somebody else's opinion of what you're going to say. So you just want to be able to speak up in a way that you're comfortable with, but don't just let yourself live in that questioning, uncertainty, assuming that things are going to turn out okay, because there's just so many stories of people who have been there. They weren't sure about something, but they assumed the school was going to take care of it, or they assumed the teacher had good intentions, or whatever. And, that turned out not to be the case. I've read stories about students who were going to like LGBTQ clubs that were secret, and they were told it was something else than what it was, and they're teaching their kids something different than their values. There's stories about students who were a different gender at school than they were at home. And some of these have gone to the point where, the parents are facing losing custody of their children because they don't want to transition them and things like that. So it's not that you want to be in fear, this is going to happen to you, but it's to be aware that this is a reality that people face. So you don't want to be the person that's just going to go with the flow and not ask questions.
Forgive me if this is an ignorant question, but why do schools do that? Why, if they have an LGBTQ club and they're telling the parents that it's something else, why are they doing that, and what makes them think that they have a right to do that?
Oh, that's a good question. So it's their mindset, right? So they believe this gender ideology is so important to a person's identity. So they have this belief, that if a person is meant to be a different gender, then that sort of comes first at all costs, and that they know best, and that if a parent is opposed to that, then they're now not an ally. They're not on the side of the student, and they should be left out. So they're prioritizing this, desire the student has to change or to transition or whatever they want to do. And they don't want any outside influences or outside viewpoints. So they would say that someone who says, you're the gender that you're born as is just wrong, and, shouldn't consider their viewpoint at all. So this is, concerning for parents who have to, deal with schools like this. But I think it also, it just shows the danger of that mindset, because family is so important, and it just really discredits their mindset at these schools that are doing this, really discredits the parent's role in a child's life, because the parent knows the child, the parent knows how they've grown up, the parent knows if they've had big changes or big struggles or difficulties, stresses that they may be facing, that maybe they're communicating at school, but they're being told, that this is your response, you're struggling with this because, and they're linking it to gender, whereas the parent has a more holistic perspective of what the child's been through. So to sever that tie for any reason is dangerous. You know, a school for any reason shouldn't be trying to break the tie between, you know, a student and their parents. But particularly in this issue, we see it, you know, really harming children who buy into this for the wrong reasons, and then they just go down. If they go medically down this road, like, damage can be done that just can't be undone afterwards.
Right. Many people avoid talking about issues like these in politics. How should we as believers handle these types of conversations? When should we speak up, and how should we do it?
That's a great question. So I'd say there's two important things that are of equal importance. So in 1 Corinthians, you know, the Bible explains to us what love is. And I think one of the most currently countercultural statements is that it says love does not delight in evil but rejoices in the truth. And so having this perspective where you're coming at it from a place of love, caring for the other person and a desiring for them to have a good life, and in that love you're valuing the truth. So both of those, love and truth, you know, you can't disjoint them, they go together. So if you really love and care for the other person, you will communicate the truth to them. And it might be a difficult truth that they don't want to hear. And this applies to politics and to all other areas too. Sometimes it's hard to share with someone reality, or it's hard to share with them that they're wrong, or that they're making a wrong choice, or supporting something that's wrong. But it's your imperative, right, as someone who knows the truth, to communicate that. But we're communicating it in a place of love, that we do value the relationship. And so knowing, you know, just how to do that, you know, really depends on your relationship with the person and the context of that communication. Because communicating about politics can look different. You know, it could be you showing up to a school board meeting and just presenting to them your concerns about, you know, I want to know what curriculum is being used, or asking questions about, you know, what you've heard, or, you know, I've seen videos of parents who have books that the students have access to in the library that they feel are inappropriate. So you're just making a statement of, you know, your concerns and what you want to be addressed. And you have every right to do that as a citizen, and you're paying taxes for this school district. And even if you're not a parent of a child at the school, you have a right to, you know, be involved in your community. And that's going to look like a different type of communication than if you're talking to like your coworker or your family. You know, when you're in those intimate relationships with people that you know, you really want to make sure you take the time to listen and to hear their experiences and their perspective, and try to, you know, ask those questions to get them thinking about it and to just show them your perspective. And when you're listening to them, that's when you can really attune to, you know, their level of engagement. You know, some people are ready for it. Some people are willing to engage with the other side of issues, and they're ready to learn from it. And some people, you know, are not, and you don't have to force it. Like, you just communicate that you have your position on whatever it is, and that you're available if they want to talk about it. And that's it. And then you continue having your regular relationship with other things. Like, you can still be friends with them and disagree, and they should know that. And I think this is true. I mean, some parents have this struggle, you know, with their children. They're trying to pass down their values, and their children are, you know, believing these other things. But you don't have to accept their wrong values to maintain that relationship. You don't have to, you know, coerce to it or try to act like what they're doing is okay. You can still say it's wrong, and you can still go out to dinner with them or play games with them or whatever, and maintain that relationship, you know, with other things. Because when they do experience something, or when they do see something that makes them realize that they're wrong, or maybe something you said was true, they know where to go. They know that they can come talk to you when they have questions. And, you know, honestly, even aside from talking to people who disagree with you, it's still good also to talk to people who do agree with you. Like, you gain perspective, and you encourage one another, because it can be challenging for some people. They're, you know, whether it's talking about political ideas or just talking about Christian values, you know, some people are the only ones that are holding on to these values, when they go into work or when they go into their community or whatever they're doing. And it can be challenging to feel alone in that. So even just talking to people that do agree with you can be uplifting and just help people feel like they're not the only ones that are trying to hold on to their values and pass them on.
Yeah, it's important to get that encouragement from other people as well. Before I started homeschooling, I'm really glad that I'm homeschooling now, but when I think about how my daughter was in public school, I'm wondering if a parent disagrees with the curriculum or the policies. I know that you were a teacher for a while. What would you tell that parent to do? Like, what is the best way to try to create change in that school, or communicate with the principal or the teacher, or what would you advise them to do?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, if I was a parent at a school, I would first try to get information about what it is that they're teaching and why they're teaching it and sort of what they have access to. Like if a parent had emailed me and asked, where are you getting your lessons from, or what's your textbook? I mean, it would be no problem for me to tell them what I was doing. So there's really no reason for a teacher to need to be secretive or have anything, hidden as far as their curriculum goes. I will say on that note that if a parent is concerned specifically about like gender ideology, a lot of schools have just incorporated that into all of their subjects. So it is more difficult. Like if you ask them, they won't have like a gender studies book that they're using or anything. And part of that is trying to, eliminate parents' voices, which I think is so sad because parents and schools really should be working together. And so I just wanted to make that note that is kind of an extra challenge to finding out. So if you're having, struggles with that communication, or if something comes up that's a red flag and you're concerned, you can talk to the principal at the school. You can attend school board meetings and you can, voice your concerns, and you can talk to other parents. And there's organizations out there now that really deal with this, like Moms for Liberty. They do a lot of this work with schools, and there's a lot of people that have experience. And so getting connected with people like that who can kind of help, logistically point you in the right direction if you do confront some issues in the schools that you want to deal with.
Have you heard stories of that making a big difference in some schools, or when the parents speak out?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've heard any that make a big difference, but I think any little difference that you make is important. Like even just getting schools to not put books in the library that could be considered pornographic, or even if you don't get the curriculum changed, but you're able to inform a lot of the other parents of what's going on so they're aware of what's going on with their students. I think that's important and significant. I do think it's your right as a parent to educate your child the way that you want to. And so if you're not comfortable with the way your school is communicating to you or with the curriculum they're using, you have the right to leave and look for a different school. But I do think it's also important that we don't just think only of our own children, and we realize that even if we pull our child out of school, no school should be doing that. Like no school should be teaching children, things that are wrong, or using this, gender ideology behind their curriculum. So it's still important, even if it's not your child in the school, to still be aware and be able to, speak up about these issues.
What would you say to someone that has talked about politics with their family and friends and has lost relationships before and is kind of scared about bringing it up now?
Yeah, well, it's tough, and no one wants to lose relationships. It just makes me think of the Bible passage where Jesus talks about how he came to bring division. I think a lot of people look to the Bible and they think it's just this message of unity. And there are a lot of verses about unity, but it's unity in the context of other believers. So we are to be united with other believers and be of one mind, because we're all following Christ. But if you're with someone who's not following Christ, you are not meant to be united with that person. And of course, it's not our imperative to divide them. Like, we're not trying to separate them away from our lives. But if they are offended by our lifestyle of living for Christ and they're, coming off of it, that is actually what the Bible tells us to expect. Like, that's something that happens. And so it's sad and difficult to go through that, but it's not something that you should blame yourself for. I think a lot of people feel like it's their job to fix it. Like, if somebody left, it's like, oh, it's my fault because I said this or said that. And, it's not automatically your fault. If the values that you're trying to keep are godly and they're leaving your, a relationship with you because of those values, they're not leaving because of you, they're leaving because of Christ. And I know sometimes people don't like to tie Christianity and politics, but there's so much, politics has grown so much that a lot of just biblical statements are now political statements, like saying that God created the male and female, right? That's now against a political ideology. It's just a Christian statement. So sometimes we're not even really trying to enter the arena of politics, but just by living our godly lives, the Bible's called us to live, and speaking the truth that's in there, we're automatically entering that arena of politics. That's not to say, to throw caution to the wind. I think when we're addressing these issues, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of value in listening to other people and getting their viewpoints and perspective, and choosing, when is the right time to engage in this sort of conversation. You don't have to bring it up at every family reunion or that kind of thing. But we want to be able to, speak the truth when it's the appropriate time, and not just stop doing it because of fear.
What is your opinion about speaking about politics in church services? Like, when pastors are giving sermons, or do you think people should, I don't know, if a pastor sat down with you and said, Autumn, I feel like God wants me to bring up these issues more, what would you say to him? How should it be done?
Well, I think in general, a lot more churches need to be willing to talk about these things, because I think a lot of churches get scared of it. But I will just say, to caution, that there are some churches that overdo it, and so they let politics become the main focus, or like their main ambition, and kind of present everything as a sort of fight against the church and culture. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to lose the heart of what we're doing, right? The purpose of coming to church is to worship God, to have fellowship with other believers, to learn the biblical values. So if you're compromising that because you're so focused on politics, then you're doing the wrong thing. But at the same time, if you are really trying to teach your church the truth of the Bible in a way that helps them engage with culture, like, you will engage with politics, because that's inevitably going to happen. Politics has just grown so much, right? There's so much in politics about sexuality, about gender ideology, and just in our culture in general. When we're teaching about family and marriage, like, these topics are going to come up. And I think you need to take that perspective of, like, what could people in my congregation be dealing with? Because there's probably people in your congregation who know somebody who wants to change their gender, or, whether it's a relative or a coworker, right? They're engaging with somebody, or there's people in your church who are subject to a training about gender ideology, and they're being taught that they're supposed to use people's preferred pronouns. Or people who are being taught another big issue I think churches are going to need to start talking about, is the issue of race. There's people who are at work, they're being taught to categorize people according to their race, and to, think of people as the oppressors or the oppressed, right? Which is not a biblical mindset. And so I think it's important to understand what's happening, and to be able to look, what does the Bible say about these issues that people need to know about, right? How are people supposed to, engage with the topic of race from a biblical perspective? Because it's there, like the story of the Good Samaritan is like great response to how we think about racism and having compassion for people regardless of their background. You know, the issue of transgenderism, you know, God created them male and female, and just really like how do we engage with people who say that like we're supposed to call them something else? Because people don't know what to do. And so if the church isn't going to give any advice or any input on these issues, people are going to go somewhere else, and they're following the advice that other people say because there is no advice from the church. So I would say, just to kind of sum up, that churches should not be afraid to engage in politics. That churches should always be speaking from biblical truth about the things people in their church need to know about, that they need teaching about. And sometimes that includes political issues. So the Bible should always be the foundation and the base and the purpose of being at church. It should never be given over to politics. But the Bible should also not be shied away from. We shouldn't be skipping verses or missing passages because we're concerned someone might be offended. You know, all of Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for instruction. And so we should be aware of that and should be using the tools that we have in Scripture to help people navigate these issues.
Yeah, I think it's so important that the church starts addressing some of these issues because, yeah, I mean, so many kids they're just bombarded with all these messages that are completely contrary to what God wants for them. And if they can't, like you were saying, if they can't get answers from their youth pastor or, you know, where are they going to go? How are they going to learn what the Bible says if the church isn't talking about it? So I think that's so important. As we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to talk about your book or your podcast, or just any words of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, well, I would just say, you know, if you're someone who's been kind of hesitant to engage in politics, that now is a really exciting time to jump in just with all that's going on. I mean, people talk a lot about, you know, it's so divisive, or there's this side or that side. But there's so many different topics, and there's so many different things people are dealing with. And it can really be an opportunity to bless people. Just different connections that I've made with people. You know, I've had opportunities through starting a conversation about politics and cultural issues to then be able to talk about biblical truths and what my values are, and ultimately sharing the gospel with people. Because all things that we do in life, right, we're engaging with, as Christians, we engage with it from a biblical perspective. So if we're really looking for truth in any area, and that includes the area of politics, right, it's coming from our biblical values and our beliefs, and that's going to come out. So the Bible doesn't want us to shy away from the world. You know, Jesus tells us that we're the salt and light of the earth. You know, a light you can see from far away, and that's, you know, the life that we live should be demonstrating Christ. And also, you know, the salt, right, I feel like that just shows closeness, right? When you put salt on something, right, it's touching it, like you're in it. And, you know, this issue of politics, right, if you get in it and you engage with people and talk about it, you know, you can use that as an opportunity to be a blessing to other people and to share the truth with them.
I did think of another question. There's so many media outlets, so much social media, so much people to follow. Are there if people want to find out more about a certain political issue or a certain candidate, where would you advise them to start?
All right, well, this might sound weird, but I actually think X is a great website for this. So, I mean, I talked about this not too long ago, but if you had told me a few years ago, you know, to go to social media for news, I would have just thought that was silly and like irresponsible. But when the assassination attempt on Trump happened, you know, I had X pulled up, and like there was just post after post after post of like videos from the event and like just everything that was happening and all the latest information that was out. And then you'd go to like mainstream media, and they're just so far behind. I mean, the things that they're saying are like embarrassing because everybody already knows like what's actually happened, who's following the story elsewhere. So on X, you get the opportunity to follow people directly, so you know exactly what they're saying. So because they'll post often, so you can follow all of the political candidates on there. You know, if you're interested in their platforms and kind of what they're sharing, what they're going to present. I think there's a lot of good voices out there to listen to, and just over time, you kind of pick and choose. You know, who you want to follow and who, you know, presents the information in a way that you enjoy and that you trust. So whenever you're starting a new source to follow, I think it's good to just always question and try to validate and try to like check kind of with multiple sources about what's going on, and always go back to like your own life experience and what you've been through. That's how I've been able to identify kind of some different sources I don't want to watch, because I've seen something for myself and then I see it portrayed on the news a different way. So I lose trust with that particular outlet. As far as people that I personally like to listen to, I'd say Turning Point USA. That's Charlie Kirk's organization. I think they have a lot of good members and people who share ideas. The Blaze is another good source. They have people like Allie Beth Stuckey, who has her own show where she'll talk about issues. She also talks about them from a conservative Christian perspective, and she'll have different guests on her show. I do like the Daily Wire. I think they, aside from just their news articles, they've also done some work that's actually, you know, kind of impacted some legislation. You know, they did some work exposing, you know, some issues at hospitals in Tennessee, and so some of the things that they've worked on, I think, have helped expose some issues that wouldn't have been exposed otherwise. And so the work that they do kind of goes beyond just showing the news and what's going on. But those are just a few different things that I enjoy. I think it's also good to, you know, listen to people who are from other perspectives as much as you're able to.
Yeah, I'm rarely on social media anymore. So X, they're not censoring basically anything, right? Or
well, that's debatable depending on who you ask.
Okay.
You know, there's always somebody thinking that the algorithm is against them, but definitely compared to the other media sites, they're much more open. I mean, Elon Musk did an interview with Trump that I listened to that live, and it was great. I loved listening to it. It reminded me of, you know, when I was younger, I read about the fireside chats that Ronald Reagan did, you know, kind of just talking to the American people directly. And so just being like listening to the audio live of Musk and Trump just having this conversation about the current issues that are going on, and it was just more casual. You know, usually when you're seeing them, a political figure interviewed, it's more combative. You know, they're trying to get him, you know, to say something they regret. But this conversation was just meant to be more lighthearted and able to just talk about things in a way that wasn't, you know, combative. So, I mean, that's on the X platform. That's the kind of things that they like to put on. But people post all kinds of things on there, and you can find different voices. You know, I was following Kennedy with his run, and I'm still following him now that he's joined with Trump. But once you follow somebody, you can kind of see other people that they post things from, and so you can kind of gain a bigger perspective by seeing like, oh, well, this person also listens to, right, so-and-so show, or this person who's working in, you know, health or whatever. And then you get more sources and more information.
Okay, cool. Can you tell our listeners how they can buy your book and how they can connect with you, find your podcast, all those good things?
Yeah, so we've got our website, AuBrueckmann.com, and you can go there. Our book's available on Amazon. That's 2034, A Cautionary Tale. And then our podcast is on Spotify and on YouTube, so that's The AuBrueckmann Show. You can also follow us on Facebook or Instagram or on X at AuBrueckmann, so that's AuBrueckmann, to follow us on there. And we're always happy, you know, to have your engagement, have your questions, your ideas, or things you're wondering about, and just, you know, have that conversation.
Great. I'll put all your links in the show notes. Thanks so much, Autumn. This has been just a fun chat with you. I really hope that people will start engaging more, because it's really important, especially with the season that we're in. I hope that they will engage in a loving way.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here. Thankful for you and the show and what you're doing and the community that you've built around this.
Thanks for listening today. If you like what you heard, would you take a minute to leave the show a review? If you want to connect with me, you can join me in my free community. The link is in the show notes, or go to herholistichealing.com. Matthew 11. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls.
For you is easy and my burden is light.
This content is for informational purposes only and is not meant to be medical advice.